am so excited that you are here with us today. We do book club every other month, and clearly in the past we did sort of an on-campus, in-person meeting, but this is so much more interesting, and I'm so excited that you guys are visiting us from across the United States. Thank you so much for being here with us. This particular program, we are partnering with Humanities Kansas. Humanities Kansas helps us with facilitators. So our facilitator today is Sandra Wiechert. Did I say it right, Sandra? You
Yes,
corrected
yes.
my pronunciation. Okay, sorry. Sandra is a native of Wichita, Kansas. She has a Master's of Arts in American History from Kansas State University. She and her husband live in Lawrence, Kansas, and she has worked as the reference librarian and communications relations coordinator for the Lawrence Public Library. She's the author of Historic Mount Oread, a catalog of KU's landmarks, and she's received Lawrence's Phoenix Award for the Literary Arts. I am delighted to introduce to you Sandra, who will be guiding our conversation. Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you all. Thank you all for being here too. My master's degree work was mostly in frontier American history. My major interest since that time has been pioneer trails and pioneers, particularly the Oregon Trail. Tonight, we are the pioneers. We are facing an uncertain future. The future, instead of locating across the country, is, are we going to get through an online evening book discussion group? And I'm really looking forward to all of this. I do have special thanks for Samantha Kenner, Don Hammett, and Troy Elkins for enabling me and everybody else to be here tonight. And I wish we are all pretending to be in the magnificent Eisenhower Library. I wish we were. Maybe there will be another time. After reading this book, I had a number of questions, particularly, what did these people look like? Are they all alive? Whatever happened to them? And kind of assuming they're your questions too, I went ahead and got all the answers. And I researched the internet quite a bit and sent in some pictures on my cell phone. They are not particularly good. I'm not really proud of them, but it's my first attempt, just like an online book discussion is likewise my first attempt. First one is Bina and Duran Dole, of course, his parents. Bina was born 1903 and died 1983. Duran, her husband, was a little 1900, and he lived to be 75. He died in the Dole's apartment 3 days after Dole and Elizabeth got married. He died while they were on their honeymoon, while staying in their apartment. Phyllis Dole, Bob Dole's first wife, was born 1925. She died in 2008 at the age of 88. The word has it that she was totally taken by surprise when Dole told her he wanted a divorce. And so that she would not have to go through that in the public eye, they gave her an emergency divorce. Nevertheless, she was so popular by that time in Washington, D.C., as a hostess for many events and for working with, particularly with the First Lady's Alliance, that the Congressional Wives Club rewrote the rules so that she, even though she was divorced, could stay in the club. And she did for quite a while. She later went on back to Kansas, and where she remained very, very close to the Dole family, particularly Bina, the mother. Later on, she married, that husband died, and then she married her high school sweetheart, who was named Benjamin Macy. And she said that the 22 years that they were married were the happiest years of her life. During that time, she still stayed close to Kansas. She worked in Sylvan Grove, had an antique store. For a while, she was occupational therapist coordinator for all of Western Kansas. And after his death, she did return to New Hampshire, where she died and I think is buried. Dole's sister, Gloria Dole Nelson, 1921, she died in 2012. She took training as a beautician in Colorado and returned with her husband to Russell. They had 6 children, and she lived out her life there doing beauty work and also as a scout leader. She had 6 children, as I said. The other sister, Norma Jean Dole, was born 1925, died in 2012. She had two children and sold real estate. After the two sisters died in 2012, Bob Dole created a scholarship in both the sisters' names. She might go back again. In both the sisters' names to Fort Hays State University, because I think a number of the grandchildren did go there. The scholarship is for $1,000 a year, and it's open to anyone in that county, with first preference being given to disabled students, and second preference being to a graduate of Russell High School who has at least a B average. So this means then that all the immediate family, other than Bob Dole, they all lived out their lives in Russell, Kansas. They are all buried there. And I haven't mentioned Kenny. I could not find a good picture of Kenny that I could reproduce. And by the way, he spelled his own name, Kenney, on all the letters, the thousands of letters that seem to be at the Dole Institute. He married, I believe, twice. He worked after the war. He worked in the same grain elevator with his father, and then he worked as a volunteer fireman. He apparently he had two children with the first wife, and then the second wife apparently had two stepchildren. So the Dole family actually had 11 grandchildren. Let's go on to to Robin, the next picture. Yes, Robin is the one child of Robert Dole and Phyllis. She was born in 1954, and I believe she is now 66 rather than 65 that I have here. She lives in Washington, D.C., and she's never lived in Russell. And to my knowledge, she has not had a real career, but she has remained, of course, loyal to her father and has helped out quite a bit, as have all the family members. They've all stayed right with him. All right, then there is Elizabeth Dole. She I could get a good picture of. She was born in 1935, so she is now 84 years old. And from everything I've read, that has been a very good marriage, long-standing marriage. Okay, what happened to all the stuff that Dole accumulated in his long lifetime? And by the way, he is now 86, will turn 87 or 96, and in next summer he will turn 97. The University of Kansas built the Dole Institute of Politics on the West Campus. It's a magnificent building, and it is built to commemorate and encourage politics as a very honorable career. It houses numerous seminars. It sponsors student interns. They have classes for Fort Leavenworth. They honor those who are making significant political contributions, whether in the United States, even all over the world, through government leadership. They honor all World War II vets and have many ways of honoring them within the building. And it stores all of the Dole papers and artifacts. And the basement, as the other person on this online conference will attest, is full, I mean full of letters upon letters upon letters and all kinds of stuff. And most of all, it's full of elephants. As you can imagine, Bob Dole was always very popular. Everywhere he went, apparently he was given elephants. And they're all over the basement at the Dole Institute. I believe I am still right on that. Someone can correct me if I want to. I forgot to say about Kenny Dole. He died fairly young at age 66 after fighting lung cancer for a long, long time. Do you remember in the book, Bob Dole said that Kenny and his dad were never able to stop smoking. Dole himself did stop smoking after about 20 years, I think it is. Okay. On permanent exhibit in the Dole Center are the famous cigar box that was used in Russell to collect money for all the operations that he had to have. One of his World War II uniforms, and I must say, it's very skinny. I think he probably had one of the infamous 22-inch waists that soldiers had at that time when it was natural with him. What you see in front of you is a large stained glass window of the United States flag. Behind that and off to your right is another stained glass window that Bob Dole himself paid for. And that is a stained glass window of Main Street in Russell, Kansas. And it's quite impressive. The Dole Institute, to me, all it also has in the lobby right behind the flag is kind of the front of the movie theater of the Russell, Kansas. Also on permanent exhibit there are videos of his commercials, which are hilarious. I will say the Dole Institute has almost been my second home for about 15 years, because with two other ladies who you might know, we did the Kansas Women's History Group for the University Women's Club at the University of Kansas. So I was there a lot. We had a really outstanding programs, I honestly can say that, on Kansas history, and the Dole very graciously let us have the use of that building for at least 24 programs a year. All of them, I think, very good. We had an average attendance of almost 100 at every one of them. So we were very glad for that. All right, also, another question I had were what were all the book titles? We know we're reading one of the books right now. What are some of the titles that he wrote? The first one is Unlimited Partners. Let's see, down at the bottom left. That was 1996, and later on that one was reissued with some different content. Second one was 1996, also Trusting the People, the Dole and Kemp Plan for World Hunger. Then the Dole's, I mentioned that, The Great Political Wit, Laughing Almost All the Way to the White House. That was 1998. And you see that one there in the top. And then Great Presidential Wit, a collection of humorous anecdotes and quotations, and that was written 2001. And then the book we're doing now, One Soldier's Story, in 2005. And in addition to these, Bob Dole wrote a number of forewords in other books and co-wrote a number of books and is included in several anthologies. So he really has proved himself as quite an author. As to the criticisms or the way these books have been posted, they are almost always receiving 5 stars, 4 stars out of all the various writings, and very, very positive. They write positively on all kinds of different things that are in the books, particularly One Soldier's Story. I read only 5 criticisms of One Soldier's Stories by, I think, 5 different people. One said, the book is no good because it doesn't include all the war. It's only about a small part of the war. They also said he doesn't talk about other soldiers enough. He only talks about himself. He doesn't talk about the era. And one even said he broke his arm so he could pat himself on the back. And to these, I would say, didn't you not read the title? It says One Soldier's Story, not World War II, not all the other people. But anyway, that was only 5, and all the other criticisms that I read were very, very superlative. Since that time, Dole has been given a number of honorary degrees, including Fort Hays, KU, and Gallaudet University in New Hampshire, where his first wife was from. He has endless honors, of course. Among them, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, 1997, the World Food Prize for his leadership on feeding students at schools, promoting worldwide nutrition, and particularly good nutrition for girls. That was a part of his career I had known nothing about. He also received an award from the Society of Preservation Against Cruelty for Animals. And again, that was a surprise to me. In 2018, he received the Congressional Gold Medal, which is one of the highest honors one can be given. He got that for soldier, statesman, and legislator. And this award also included his promotion from Captain Dole to Colonel Dole. So he is now a colonel. Since the book, we ended the book with Dole receiving, well, he'd been in the hospital for quite a while and had been told that due to the fall, he would probably never have good use of his arm again. That has happened. He has very, very little use of that left arm and hand. And of course, we know now that he had very little use of it to even start with. In 2009, he was hospitalized for a skin graft on his leg. 2010, he was in the hospital for almost a full year. He went in for knee surgery, and after that, he had one bout after another of pneumonia. 2017, he was hospitalized for low blood pressure. I don't know when he started using a wheelchair, probably a good 10 years ago, but nevertheless, he is still fairly active and has remained active during the years. It said that he became a good walker, was able to walk as faster than most people, going from his office building over to the Senate. Now, for discussion, I've said enough. I think everyone here probably has had some contact directly or indirectly with Dole, and directly or indirectly with members of his family, and we probably all love to share our experiences, and we'd all love to hear them, but let's don't. Let's try to remember we are here to discuss the book and try to keep our focus on that. I want everyone to say at least something as we discuss. You don't have to say very much. If there are some of you who have not read all of the book, surely you can say something about the first part of it. And please remember, there are no wrong answers. There are no silly answers. There are only good answers. If you say something that somebody else, if you want to say something that somebody else has already said, fine, go ahead. I hope you can all have different answers. That makes the discussion more fun. I'm not quite sure how we're going to do this. I think we all know from other Zoom meetings, etc., that it can get quite noisy if everyone speaks at once. So Troy is going to try to handle that. We'll see how that one goes. First of all, I'd like for each of you to share one thing, just one, that really popped out at you as you read this book, or maybe has popped out at you since you finished the book. And this could be something like an incident, or a phrase, or maybe just one or two words, or maybe a whole chapter, or a whole incident, or maybe just a broad feeling overall. But could you please just say one thing, and then everyone can get the chance. Troy, I'll leave that up to you as to how we're going to manage that. But let's hear what you think. What is something you just really found especially interesting or significant?
So this is Dawn. I want to remind you that most of you are muted. I am going to say that Janet and Mita are part of our general book club members.
Yes.
And
Everybody.
So maybe as sort of veterans to the club, that Janet or Mita might have something to add immediately.
Okay, this is Mita, and I have to admit, of all the books in the book club, I think we've missed very few of the discussions, but I didn't read it for two reasons. One, I had no access to a public library and couldn't get to the Eisenhower Center to buy it, and so I can't make a comment on it, but I've certainly enjoyed all the information that you've been providing.
Thank you.
Janet, what about you? I could see that you were struggling to unmute yourself.
I think I'm unmuted now.
There you go.
All right. I didn't finish the book. I was reading it on, what do you call that?
Kindle.
A Kindle on my phone. And the main thing that struck me, because of course it was at the beginning of the book, which is all I read, was the experience in the war in Italy, and it paralleled, I believe, my father's experience. He fought in Italy, and he was wounded. He had a big scar on the back of his shoulder, and as I read Dole's account, I really wished that I had spoken to my father more about his experience.
Of course.
So I think now I'm going to, when I think of my father's experience, I'll probably just sort of paste Dole's experience onto a memory, become become a different memory, but it was probably very similar.
You know, but you're right, Janet. This is something that we've all experienced, right? That this generation of people really just didn't talk about their experiences, and so we're left here to try to figure it out, right?
Yeah.
So that's good. You're saying it's a parallel experience that directly affected your family, and it's making you more curious. Yes.
Yeah.
Well, more power to you. Who's next?
I could probably go. This is Marty,
All right, Marty.
and I've got that. Michael, unless you're mute again, I guess.
Okay.
Okay, I enjoyed the history aspect of it and reading about his experience in the war as well as his recovery throughout, a couple of years, I guess, from recovery fully, where he actually got out of the hospital. It was interesting reading, I thought.
So you enjoyed the history.
Yeah.
Did the history relate to you particularly, or was it all was it new to you what you read?
Yeah, I mean, it was. Part of it was. I mean, the war in Italy isn't covered so much. I remember like about D-Day, and about the same time they were invading Italy. So I mean, that's an interesting aspect, and then opened up the two angles to attack Germany. And I thought it was interesting that he actually getting involved in the war itself. So he enlisted pretty early. He didn't actually get in the battle until towards the end. He was in there. He wasn't injured until after Eisenhower. I mean, after Roosevelt died, and the war was almost over by that point. So
It is somewhat
fairly new to the battle, anyways. He was like a second lieutenant, fresh into a reflex.
right.
And they were training him.
It's
So
ironic, all those years of training, and then he gets in the last month of the war and he's injured immediately.
Right,
Yeah.
pretty much.
And yet, of course, it influenced the remainder of his life. Very good points. Okay, somebody else.
We had Beth had a comment, and then I think Pam had a question she'd like to go with.
Okay. Beth?
I just commented that the family seems so strong and supportive. It meant a lot to him. You could tell his family meant a lot to him.
Yes. All of them. All the family did.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So the families, he never lets go of that all through the book. And I think that's quite significant. And he gives them so much credit. Well, let's go on to someone else here.
I think that Pam had a question first.
So I was wondering, I didn't get a chance to read the book either. I apologize. And I love this format. Thank you guys for putting this together. But my question was, and Julie said she probably has the answer if you don't, Sandra, but it's why did Dole choose to put his institute at KU? It always surprised me that it's not at Fort Hays, and why didn't he return to Russell?
I think the answer probably is that there are lots of alums who had the money and could help support it. Plus the fact that clearly Bob Dole was a KU person. I had always wondered why he went to Washburn. And now I know that it was strictly a medical reason was why he got the law degree at Washburn. But he's really, I think, is a KU person all the way through. And it was accessible to Kansas City and really everybody else. Those are my answers. I mean, and I was here when it was dedicated. There was the space for it. There was the money for it. There was clearly the support and the tourism angle, the ease of getting there was there. And it was easy for every politicians or what. And also near Fort Leavenworth. Fort Leavenworth has, I think, been a pretty major part. They send a lot of their command and general staff people there. Janet, do you want to answer anything more on that? All right.
Well, this is Julie Burgundy. I
Really,
am
pardon me.
the education coordinator at the Dole Institute, and so I can give a little bit of light on this. But your description was pretty accurate. I just want to include that Chancellor Robert Hemingway of the University of Kansas approached Senator Bob Dole before the 1996 election and basically said, no matter what happens in the election, we would like to house your papers here at the University of Kansas. And, you know, so if Senator Dole would have won in the 1996 presidential election, Lawrence would have been the site of the Dole Presidential Library. So there was obviously some changes that happened. We had to make it a little smaller, but that was, I mean, Chancellor Hemingway just offered, and yeah, based on, even though he loves the people of Russell, you know, based on tourism and space and all that, and Senator Dole knew that KU would take care of the collection and be a good steward of the collection. So that are the main reasons for that.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. I think that's a part of our education too. I'd like to hear from somebody else now on some of the things that just popped out at them from this book or what they particularly appreciated.
So Susan's writing 39 months in a military hospital. Shall we talk about that?
That is a very good comment. Do you want to augment that, Susan?
I read a lot of presidential history, and I didn't really know that much about Bob Dole, except for what I remember from just here and there. His stamina and his self-will to make him continue on in his own way of rehabbing. But this being in a hospitals, and I did read the book, by the way, hospitals for over 3 years, recovering, and still keep the kind of attitude that he had, I think it's just remarkable.
It is remarkable. And he gives us lots of hints on things that helped him, like the Sinatra song.
Right.
Over and over again. But just, we'll talk about that. I do want to come back to that a little bit later, and remind me if I don't, Susan, because we need to know why he survived. But it's also, I think, very interesting, the people that he met in the hospital, like Daniel Inouye and some of the others.
Phil Hart, yeah.
How they all, certainly not all the men that were in those hospitals went on to the strong life that he had, but 3 of them did. And we will always wonder why, what really enabled them. Thank you for making that point. Okay, somebody else? Kim? I can barely see the name. I can't see your face. Or Camille, how about you?
I'm here. I have not read the book. However, I've always been inspired by Senator Dole. I had the pleasure of meeting him a couple of times about in the 80s or 90s at events in Washington. And he was very gracious. And I was always inspired by the theme of the Tom Brokaw book, The Greatest Generation, that he so epitomized that. And I've just always had a great deal of admiration and respect for him.
Samantha, he was talking about, we had Bob Dole, and Samantha and Troy and Beth would probably be able to talk about this, but not me. It was before I was around. But we did have a very special program at the Eisenhower Presidential Library for Senator Dole.
Have we missed anyone?
I was just going to share, it was I think it was May 2014. Bob Dole was making a point to go to every community in Kansas is sort of his farewell tour. And we had the honor of hosting him for an afternoon. It was great.
Wonderful.
Dawn, this is Linda. He also did a program in 1990 as part of the Eisenhower Centennial, and he actually spoke on the porch of the home and honored Eisenhower as one soldier to another. It was really a moving ceremony with him.
So that's actually an interesting point to me, Linda. You know, Bob's book Senator Dole's book is One Soldier's Story. And President Eisenhower was clearly very interested in supporting our service members and, like a continued reverence to our service members during World War II. And now clearly we have brought that into the future and the current situation. So could we talk about his service during World War II a little bit? I haven't read the book either, but I would really love to learn a little bit more about Senator Dole's specific service during the war.
Well, like we said, it was the first battle he was in. It was the last month of the war, and he was shot, I think, within 2 hours. So it's very ironic. He has very, very little service during the war.
He was part of the 10th Mountain Division.
Yes. And I thought it was very significant. The 10th Mountain Division was mostly, or a good many of them were men who had been trained in mountain climbing, mountain snowshoeing, mountain skiing. They were really a crack unit.
Well, that's everywhere in Kansas. I can see where he got that experience from.
Yes, and then they made him second lieutenant to supervise all of that, which is another one of the Army's ironies. I would like to tell a little bit about some of the things that popped out at me. For one thing, in the very first lines of the book, he talks about he misses his quart of milk a day. And that made me laugh out loud, because in my childhood, you had to drink a quart of milk every day, no matter what. No matter how little money my family had, we all had our quart of milk a day. And apparently Bob Dole had that too. Something else that was very poignant with me in the book was finally they tried to give him penicillin. It was the new wonder drug. And he got to have penicillin, and apparently it did not work for him because they put him on streptomycin. And there again, in 1945, I was 7, and I was bedfast for a whole year with rheumatic fever. And I remember my mother telling me that a drug had been invented called penicillin that would cure rheumatic fever, but I couldn't get it because the war was still going on and all penicillin was being saved for veterans. So I accepted that. And reading that in the book was very poignant to me because of that. Something else that really struck me in the book was the constant gratitude that he showed for everybody. Another thing I thought was very strong was the banker's insistence that he go out and buy a hat, because if he were wearing a hat, he would be given status in the community and people would look up to him and recognize him as a grown man. And I remember that attitude in Wichita, Kansas, just as well. So before we move on to another question here, is there anything else that anyone would like to mention that just really popped out at them in the book? Because I think so many things.
I don't know. Do I need to get on another place to talk?
You're fine.
One of the things that impressed me was his relationship with Fog Allen, for anybody who's a KU fan.
Yes.
And how he and I'm blocking on the name of the gentleman who showed up at the hospital, I think it was early on, just agreeing because, he wasn't going to play basketball again, but it was just that it just showed something about Fog Allen that I didn't know too. So
yes, he was the builder of men.
Yeah.
And, he was really the one that encouraged him to come to KU to begin with.
Right.
And Dole was always, I'm glad you brought that up. So that's the kind of little bit things that I think are important, and maybe starting with discussions of book, the things that you just are really going to remember. The other man was Dean Nesmith, not Naismith, but Nesmith, and that one's different. Yeah. Something else I'd like to talk about here too, in this is really a book largely about Dole's early life. It's a soldier's story, but it's the young soldier's story. And there are things in the book from birth up until he is injured that had to address his character development and his success later on. And I'd like to talk about, again, I'd like as many of you to talk as possible, but in the book, what are the things that enabled him? And you just brought up one, Fog Allen, the importance of Fog Allen, and I brought up the hat wearing. some of the things that influenced him in his later life or enabled him to become who he did become. Well, certainly someone's already mentioned his parents. And he never criticizes his parents. Now, something I noticed interesting is he tells that they were so poor that in order to stabilize the family income, they moved into the basement and rented out the house above them.
Wow.
And he tells it in a very positive manner. This is the way it was. This is what we did. And we lived in the basement. No complaints. He lived in the basement. The two sisters in their memoirs kind of say the same thing, that there was not money. And this was true of that era. So it was not that the Doles were so poor. It's just that was the way that it was, and especially during the Depression and in Western Kansas. The two sisters talk about it the same way, but Kenny, in his comments, said something like, "My parents made us live in the basement." And I think those two comments say a lot, that Dole accepted it, took the challenge, and got over it. Kenny never did. And certainly not criticizing Kenny because he stayed a grain elevator operator, but I think those kinds of comments speak volumes about the two brothers.
Well, it's kind of reminiscent to me about what we know about Eisenhower. So clearly our local community knows a lot more about Eisenhower than the general population. But, so Eisenhower talked about how they were poor, but he didn't know it. And I think, so I'm an outsider, I'm not from Kansas, but to me, the thing that strikes me about sort of like Kansas culture is an independent, can-do, work hard ethic. And so the Kansans are not complainers. The Kansans are gonna assess the situation, understand what they need to do, and just do it.
Right.
I think the work ethic that his father had, you just mentioned about that, but the idea of that soda fountain where he worked for so long and what a dear place that was for him, the strong relationships that he had with people because of this kind of small town thing, that all contributed, I think, to.
Yeah, it seems sort of parallel to me, Susan, with Eisenhower, don't you think? Just sort of like the general Kansas attitude.
Right.
That's parallel is a good answer. A very good term for that.
Julie's ready to say something.
Good, Julie.
Also on that Kenny Bob comment is that, remember, Kenny is the younger brother. He's the baby.
Yes.
So
yes,
maybe that also lends something.
Good point.
Good points. Usually the older ones.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is a good point. I noticed in Bob Dole's working, he works in the soda fountain and he loves it. And he shows off. He flips the ice cream balls up to the ceiling and catches them. He shows off, but he does, and someone mentioned relationships. It seems like in everything that he did as a youngster, he does seek out relationships and he knows how to build them. Like the banker that wanted him to wear a hat, he already had that relationship going before he started. And certainly relationships with all the customers. He seems like maybe from the beginning, he's a very public person, chooses to be a public person and not, he talks about being shy. I think we have different definitions of being shy, but I noticed that about him also. What about his mother's fanaticism for neatness?
What'd you think about that, Susan?
Well, I thought that sounded like a lot of mothers of that generation.
Yes.
And that when you don't have much, you keep it neat. Well, that's a gross overstatement, but for many people, families, you keep nice what you have, and that it reminded me of my own family and
Mhm.
stories that I'd heard. I was impressed by how she came and got an apartment. Was that when he was in Topeka? And stayed very close to him. Had to keep going outside because she was crying and she didn't want him to see that. And just that deep mother's love that she had for him, which is a beautiful thing.
Yes, it is. I was impressed that when he was in the Army and not actively fighting, but just in it for what, 2 years before he finally got in there, the constant sending of cookies and fruit and candies and cakes. I mean, it's a lot of work to send stuff. It really is. I think you all know that. You all have college kids. It's a lot of work to send stuff. And it sounds like she was sending him food every single week for years and years. Of course, that was what she could do. Your point about people who do not have much seem to go to a lot of effort to keep it super neat and super, like you said, that was our generation, but definitely her of all. I think Bob Dole never seems to blame anyone. And that was certainly, I think, a quality that arose later on in life when he was in the government. He doesn't blame people, he works with them. And he seemed very impressed by the doctor who said, make use of what you have left. Don't think about what you've lost. Make use of what you have left. And I think he grew up with that idea. What about sports? Did that have an effect on him? I think it did. All through the book, he talks about he wants to play basketball, he wants to run, he wants to play football, and he never quits with that. Even after that seems to have been his guiding force towards recovery, was he kept thinking he could play basketball again.
Well, that makes sense clearly I'm not an athlete, but that makes sense for an athlete's persona. Like, don't they sort of strive for things that are just beyond their reach? I'm not an athlete. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Well, I'm not either, but I had a son and a brother that were. So I think probably he was in such good health when he was injured that health held out for a long time and helped him a great deal in the injury. And the desire to run again and to walk again, the importance of it.
What you want to say, Julie?
I actually have read some newspaper articles that Dole was voted, I forget the term they call it, but like best, not just best dressed, but also best man, like best man of his class, basically. So he's very well respected, and he was pretty good looking. Like we have a few good pictures of him.
Yeah. So Julie, on a really weird side note, Eisenhower's brother was elected, his superlative was that he was going to be the president of the United States. Just saying, his brother.
That's right, yeah.
Which brother?
Which one, Linda? Which one, Troy? Nobody's going to answer? Come on, y'all. There's 3 of y'all. Somebody's got to.
There are 4 choices of brothers.
Lots of brothers. Choose one. It wasn't Dwight. Troy's going to hear from me tomorrow that he doesn't know this answer.
Milton. How about Milton?
Milton. It wasn't Milton, was it? No, it was Edgar.
I was going to say Edgar.
Whichever one he was in the same
Edgar.
class with.
Edgar, yeah.
Right, Edgar.
Well, I think it could
Thank you, Pam.
Milton became president at 3 colleges.
It's really interesting to me just listening sort of the parallels of their 2 lives, even though they were, separated by several years in age. Sort of this Kansas can-do attitude, this sports-based physical person, the love of community, the love of people, serving people.
They're also parallel living conditions almost. I mean, Abilene and Russell are not particularly far apart. So there are a lot
That's
of
true.
parallels there.
That's true. What about you, Mita? So your family's Kansas. I'm not exactly sure where in Kansas your family's from. Do you feel parallel to a Kansas sort of point of view?
Let me see. Am I off mute?
Yes, you are.
Well, we were from Stafford and lived on the farm, and yes, how people, we never defined anything as being poor. It was just the way it was.
Yep.
And, you just did what you needed to do. And I think back, especially now, I mean, and I think of my mom, who grew up in a small town, and all of a sudden she got married and lived on the farm. And talk about survival, they didn't have indoor plumbing, they didn't have electricity, they didn't have any of those kinds of things, but people just survived. So, and I think that's very true of Bob Dole.
Yes.
The other thing that I keep thinking about through all of this, and it's beyond the soldier, but I think about, the connection that he had with Nancy Kassebaum.
Yes.
They were both in the Senate, and how they worked together, and, they need to come back together and write a book on civility and how to get along and the art of compromise. And, I think we've lost a lot of that.
That's an excellent point. Nancy's an amazing human being.
Yeah.
Yes, she is. And she's also a Western Kansas.
Right.
To a large extent. I mean, she's from Southeast Kansas, but Western Kansas has been her home for quite a while.
Yeah.
And she has a lot of that in her. But she was not raised poor.
Right.
But she experienced it all around her, and she experienced the farm, the wide open spaces. I think that's good. So Dole went on to become a very successful person. We all know that. I did not know that he says it in the book that he served the longest as majority leader in the Senate that anyone ever had. What he didn't say, because he didn't know it, is now that Mitch McConnell has taken over that lead. But I am rather sorry that Dole doesn't still hold the record, because that is quite an accomplishment for him.
Can I?
Yes, please.
I have a comment and have a question. I'm Equan, came from Nixon Library.
Yes.
I'm exhibit specialist in education. I have not read those books, but at the end of our new permanent gallery, there's a Nixon funeral where the Bob Dole was one of the special speaker eulogy in April 27, 1994. And towards the end, he was weeping. And it just moves me when I see him every time. It's just humility and his honesty and lovable and handsome man. And I'm very impressed by every time when I walk through, see that him on the image.
I'm glad you brought that up, and stay on. Concerning that story of Dole weeping at Nixon's funeral, there are several newspaper stories and questions to other writers who say, was Dole really crying? He doesn't cry. Was he really crying? Why would he cry? And yes.
I have not had the opportunity to read the book. I stumbled onto this book talk, and I'm so glad that I did. But thank you, Equan, for what you said, because I was doing a little research while we were on the phone, and Bob Dole was a huge Nixon fan and supporter, which Nixon always appreciated. But I just wanted to just read a real short excerpt from Dole's speech on that day in April 1994. And there's one section that said, "To tens of millions of his countrymen, Richard Nixon was an American hero, a hero who shared and honored their belief in working hard, worshiping God, loving their families, and saluting the flag. He called them the silent majority. Like them, they valued accomplishment more than ideology. They wanted their government to do the decent thing, but not to bankrupt them in the process." And there's so much relevance to the words of Bob Dole in 1994. And yes, he was in fact weeping. It's clear that he was weeping as he was finishing his remarks and returning to his seat and being consoled by Elizabeth. But I do look at. I've always been a huge fan of Bob Dole, and like my father, he was a member of the greatest generation. My father was a World War II naval aviator who joined just after Pearl Harbor, and at 20 years old, 1 year later, was flying over Germany. And so that generation was very special, and Bob Dole was a special man, partly because of that. But I joined the call because of my support for Senator Dole, and also for the program that we were trying to get together here at the Nixon Library in partnership with the Dole Institute. That may occur someday, but it's been delayed somewhat. But anyway, thank you for having us and for hearing me out.
Thank you for your comment. And Econ, I kind of cut you off because my phone went off.
That's okay.
Can you continue with what you were saying?
Oh, and then my question was how the relationship between the Senator Bob Dole and Nixon were developed, and how significant that the moment at the end. It's just so genuine and so beautiful, and it just so much the good human being, as American politicians, and I'm very moved by that.
Well, the commentary, like I said, that I have read was he really crying? And they have all answered, yes, he really was. He truly was a very good friend of Nixon. And I think it shows part of his character, another part, well, a strengthening of his character, that he genuinely was very supportive of all presidents and very supportive of leadership as far as he could be. But he genuinely was close. He was, he was beaten by Clinton, and yet he and Clinton remained very good friends. And he always supported Clinton through his own scandals and all that. He liked them all, which shows strength of character with how he crossed the aisle on so many things.
Sandra, I just want to point out that Julie sent us this picture of, this is Julie Nixon and David Eisenhower and Bob Dole in the background.
Right.
Now, Bob Dole's on the left, isn't he? The far left?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Very
handsome man.
Yes.
Look at David and Julie.
They're so cute. They were really cute. They were a cute
That's
couple.
pretty good.
Hello.
Yes.
I mean, we do have tons of other, obviously, Nixon materials, but I thought this picture at least connection to each of those that we were talking about, Nixon and Eisenhower and Dole.
That's good.
What's the time frame on this one?
What?
Hello.
Well, the 303 area code is checking in.
All right, I'm calling from Denver.
Oh.
Okay.
Well, hi.
Hi, my name's Larry Boney. I'm an Eisenhower boss, and I just tuned into the program here. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Well, we're glad you're here. Thank you for being here with us.
We're mostly talking
Yes.
about Dole, but of course, anything on Dole does involve Eisenhower quite a bit as well.
And apparently Nixon.
I'd be interested if someone knows when Senator Dole first met Dwight Eisenhower, and what kind of relationship did they have through the years?
Is this a question for Julie?
Anyone?
I think it probably is.
Julie, would you like to answer that for us?
I don't know exactly how many times they met, but I do. So both of these pictures that I put in the link and then Troy is displaying on the screen are from 1961. I guess Eisenhower people, when did Eisenhower pass away?
March 1969.
Okay, so there was probably some other photo ops in between 1961 and 1969. Eisenhower was Senator Dole's idol, not only because he's a native Kansan, but he was also president of the United States, and obviously served as his general during World War II. And so Dole always says Eisenhower was his political hero and idol. But I'm not sure how many times they met or what their relationship looked like. I just know that he had great admiration and respect.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
So as a president, I know that Eisenhower met with some of the junior congressmen with some regularity. So I'm sure it was just sort of that general relationship, right, Julie?
Yes. And also that brings to mind, we actually have an online special exhibit on Eisenhower. And let me just pull that up and put it in the chat. There it is.
All right, next time y'all do that, Julie, you need to let us know.
Okay.
Let's do that. Well, one thing else I would like to say is quite often in book discussions, we don't discuss the book as literature or the book or the style of writing. And since not too many of you have read the book, I won't ask to, well, please chime in if you would like to, but these are things I noticed about the book. I don't think he used a ghostwriter. To me, I'm sure he used many researchers and aides. He always had plenty of surrounding, but I don't think his books are ghostwritten at all. His book is very simple to read, very straightforward, no big words. Also, it doesn't move forwards and backwards like so many modern literature books do, and making it very hard to follow. His is very easy to read, but I think it's very profound, has deep thoughts within it. Another technique that he uses in writing this book, and I suspect in all the other books that he wrote, he uses letters. And that's something that isn't going to happen very much anymore because people don't write letters anymore. I found this very refreshing to read the letters that he wrote, that his family wrote, that Kenny wrote. And Julie, I imagine you can tell me how many gazillion letters are in the Dole Institute, but he had all those letters at his access, easy access when he was writing them. There are other things I think are particularly significant about his later life that we might like to bring up. He was somewhat largely responsible, well, not responsible, but certainly supportive and working hard to accomplish food stamps. I did not know that. Maybe some of you did. I did not know about his work with animal welfare. Also found out that he is one of the big supporters of Martin Luther King Day, which was news to me. And now I think that's an accepted major holiday of the year. He did a lot towards saving and honoring Social Security, a lot with voting rights. Certainly, based on this book and the other things that have been said, a lot on veteran care, saluting veterans' hospitals, supporting veteran care, veteran post-care in other ways other than just plain physical. So we have him to thank for a lot of that. He was a supporter of education. Like I said earlier, he supported nutrition programs, and particularly nutrition for girls, which was something I didn't know about. The big thing that I know him for was his support of disability rights and the acceptance of people with disabilities. I think these things that I've mentioned would have happened anyway, but he was known as a man who could clearly think and go to action immediately. He didn't push things through right then and there. He took advice from a lot of people. But if someone would say something that he would say, that's a good idea, he didn't wait. He wrote it down immediately, got his staff working immediately, and eventually the things that he wanted often got passed. Of course, we know about the World War II Memorial. He writes of that. But he is known for quick action, and he was very much known for compromise, for seeking across the aisle, having breakfast, other meetings with people from the other side of the aisle, or from no side, or down in the center of the aisle. But he tried not to make enemies because he never knew the next person might be someone who he would really have to work with. I would like to ask another question here. Who should read the book other than you who are here tonight? Should these be, is this a book for school? Is it a book for discussion groups?
So my answer is with ignorance, because I've already admitted that I haven't read it, but I am currently interested in bringing this sort of information to a younger generation, people who didn't live through it, who don't have a personal experience. And so this seems like information that a younger generation should benefit from, or should be able to have access to.
Yes, it's a very easy book to read. It's less than 300 pages. Talks about, I mean, you get quite, it's not very many words, but you learn about the Depression, you learn about a little bit about the Dust Bowl, you learn about World War I in bits and pieces. Certainly not a lot about World War II, because his focus is, of course, limited. Certainly you get a lot about recovery, about medical care. And I think we will always wonder, if his accident had happened today, how would it have been treated? Would he have had a shorter and a better recovery? I don't know. Maybe somebody else does that knows more about medical care than I do. But certainly World War II brought a lot of advances with medical care, and he touches on that it's going to be different from now on. I guess I'm really in favor of junior highs and high school students reading this, because I said it's very easy reading, but I think it's very profound. Are there other comments from others of you? I think the comment that not many people know much about World War II is certainly good.
So I'm going to actually ask Cliff. Cliff is one of our educators within the National Archives. He is at the Nixon Presidential Library. And as a professional educator, Cliff, what do you think?
I think I would agree. High school is probably the perfect age. I believe that's a good target market for this book. But while I'm speaking, I'd also like to say I'm a retired Marine. And there's no
such thing as a retired Marine.
That's true. That's true.
Troy is also a Marine, by the way.
Oh, great. But there's another image of Bob Dole that I believe sums up his being, his life, and that is at President Bush's funeral. No one or no thing was going to stop him from standing up out of his wheelchair and saluting the president of the United States.
You're right.
Mm-hmm.
And that meant so much to all of us,
mm-hmm.
and especially those veterans, because we know what he was doing, and I think that kind of sums up his being.
Yes.
What an excellent point, Cliff. And this sort of attitude to service, and not only serving through the military, but serving my community directly is, oh, look, Troy found the photo. Oh, Troy, you're going to make us all cry.
Larry from Denver, could I make a comment?
Please.
Absolutely, Larry.
Hi, Cliff. You're from the Nixon Library?
Yes.
Yes, Cliff's from Nixon.
I grew up in South Dakota, and when Senator George McGovern was in office, I know that Senator McGovern, of course, a very liberal Democrat, was good friends with Bob Dole, and they worked together on a lot of agricultural legislation. And George McGovern always spoke very highly of Bob Dole, and that could probably be confirmed at the Nixon Library. So anyway, it was interesting. I don't know today if there are many relationships that were as warm as Bob Dole and George McGovern. Of course, McGovern was a pilot during World War II and did bombing missions from Italy on up into Germany and other countries, Nazi-held countries. So I think that Bob Dole and George McGovern shared a common bond with the service in Italy.
Yes.
So,
Julie.
I just wanted to
Did I
give some. Yeah.
Julie's with us, by the way. Julie's the educator at the Bob Dole Institute. So Julie is our content expert on site right now.
Oh, okay.
I just
well,
signed
I
it
guess,
for me.
What's that, Julie?
About that photo. I just want to give you some insider information about that photo. So, you know, he did stand up at the funeral, and that's not planned. Nobody knew about it, not even his nurse behind him. So he did that all on his own, just in the spur of the moment. It was never thought out or anything.
So do you guys get to see him? Does he come by with any regularity?
Yes, I would say regularity. He hasn't been back. He usually comes back about once a year. He travels to Kansas multiple times a year, and whenever he's in the area, he does stop by. But it's been, I mean, I think it's probably been about 1.5 or 2 years now. So I've been there 5 years, and I think I've met him 5 times.
This man is just absolutely a Kansas legend. No doubt about it. Right, Julie?
Right, yeah. When he did his tour of Kansas to visit all 105 counties, at the beginning, his staff, his personal staff, didn't know what was going to happen. They're like, he's 92 or whatever that he was at that moment, and they didn't know if he would make the whole tour. But by the end, he was actually stronger than when he started. So when he started, he was kind of in a wheelchair and needing assistance. By the end, he was walking, and you know, he became stronger because he was talking with his constituents and talking to real people. And so, yeah, he's just a legend.
Mita, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about that as a Kansan, Mita?
I know that he talks with Nancy Kassebaum from time to time, and they have good discussions, and you know, I think both of those people make Kansas proud.
That's a good point.
I was in Washington, D.C. at the Reagan National Airport coming home from Parents' Day at American University with my daughter. I was in the airport, look up, and several men were walking towards me, and I saw that one of them had a blue pen in his right hand. And I just froze because I knew that was Bob Dole. And I looked up, and he looked right at me and just held my eyes for seemed to me quite a while. I'm sure it was just seconds. And then walked on. I was so hoping he would be on my flight home from Kansas, but apparently he went on a different plane for a different reason. But some of the others like to share an experience now as we're kind of winding down.
If my husband were here and he's out in the shed, he would have to tell you the story that when Bob Dole was married, someone from somewhere, probably from the Eisenhower Center, contacted him and selected a piece, and he donated a piece of pottery. He's a potter from a graduate of K-State. And so Bob Dole has a piece of his pottery, of my husband, Barry West.
No way.
Wonderful.
Yeah, isn't that
Wonderful.
cool?
That's amazing.
Yeah, I know it.
I love that story.
Yeah. Would anyone else like to share a story?
I don't have a Bob Dole story, but I do have a Bob Dole Institute story. Julie, listen up.
All right.
I was lucky enough to visit the Dole Institute. I think I was with Pam. Was I with you, Pam?
Yes, you were.
It was me and Pam. So it was the first time I was able to go to the Dole Institute, and I was just astounded. It's such an amazing location, not only the physical location, the architecture, the grandeur of the place, but the concept of the mission and what you do there every day, Julie, is really astounding. And so I think, Pam, you had been there before you'd been there before, right? Or was that your first time as well?
Yes, I think I had. Well, let's see. Was that when we did the tour, or did I do the tour?
I think well, I did a tour and you were with me. Is it the one you're talking about?
That one?
Like the year before last. It was recently. I've only been here 3 years, Julie. It hasn't been that long.
So then did I give you a tour?
You were there, but a brunette gave me a tour.
Okay, that was my last then, yeah.
Just an astounding place. And if you ever get a chance to go to the Dole Institute, I highly recommend it. It was really first class, Julie, first class.
It is. It is a first class. It is first class place. And it seems like they are busy 24 hours out of 24 hours. There are always programs going on, always student talks, always international leaders. It's a lovely place to go. What do you think Dole will be or should be remembered for as years go on? I mentioned Martin Luther King Day, Social Security, disability rights, veterans' rights, voting rights. As years go on, what do you think will be his most important legacy, or maybe his most, make that plural, his most important legacies?
Anybody from our phone? Anybody from the phone want to?
Dawn, this is Linda.
There you are, Linda.
I couldn't get off mute.
Sure. I fired you a minute ago.
So I heard you. So I'm calling back in on Brenda's phone because I couldn't get off my phone to do anything. I think one of the things Bob's going to be remembered with is his love of the veterans, which is still going on today. And if he feels like it, and there is a group of honor flight people in D.C., he's at the World War II Memorial to greet them. He's in his wheelchair, but he's there. And his love for the veterans comes through so much. I've known him probably close to 40 years. I go years without seeing him, and then I'll see him again, and he still calls me by name, which just floors me every time it happens.
Yes. So I think the whole concept of veteran recognition and veteran care has turned around a great deal in recent years. And whether Dole will be attached to that memory or not, we don't really know. But certainly the fact that he has pushed for it and honored it, I think will be remembered for some time to come.
I think he'll also be remembered for the Eisenhower Memorial in D.C. because he really did a lot of work on fundraising to push that over the top to get the funding for it. And he wanted it done when we still had veterans who could honor Ike.
Yes, yes. Another opinion on another one of his accomplishments. How will he be remembered? Or what things that he did will be remembered? I could put it that way as well.
So this is Pam. I think his work on disability is just phenomenal. I think so many of the other things, it's fantastic. But in a way, again, kind of like kind of that hidden hand. So it is a surprise to hear in some ways that he was involved in all these things. I mean, surprising in the fact that, I didn't know he did that, but not surprising in the fact that the type of person he is makes sense that he would be involved in those types of issues. But I think the disability rights has been huge.
And it's not going to go away.
Right.
I think it's going to last and will hopefully forever. But there is such a change from my own childhood and probably all of your childhoods too, as I grew up in the era when they were still hidden in the back closet. And now, all children have the right to education. Curb cuts are in every street, classrooms accept everyone. Every college has a way for a student to get into the building or have someone help them with their studies. I notice on all of these talks by Trump and Dr. Fauci on coronavirus, there's always a person doing sign language. That has never happened. I mean, I think all these things are a direct result of Dole. They may not be known with his name attached, and I think a lot of it may have happened anyway, but not anywhere near as soon as it did with Bob Dole really pushing. And he did push on that, and there was resistance. I remember the resistance to it, but now I think that I know in Lawrence, there are people out on their three-wheeled tricycles all the time. And seniors or people who have used the carts, the electric carts, I mean, they're everywhere. And that's the way it should be. But so I think that will be his major thing. I know people here at KU feel that that will be his major legacy, probably, is accessibility for handicapped and the rights of the handicapped to have a full way of life. I think we're probably kind of winding down here. I said in the beginning, we were pioneers, just like the early trail pioneers. We have made it through to our destination, which is the end of our talk. I'm hoping that there will be another time, and we hope that will really reach our destination in the Eisenhower Library. I will close my part with I think the book is highly quotable, and Dole has a lot of lines that are good quotes, but there's one that I thought was especially nice. He says, "The greatest social program in the world is a neighbor who cares about you." I thought that was really lovely. The greatest social program in the world is a neighbor who cares about you. And we have all been neighbors tonight. And that is, I appreciate that.
I want to thank you. This was a big transition from what we anticipated tonight being, and your grace and dedication is really, I really want you to recognize how important it was for us, and you've made this just a wonderful moment. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you from Denver. Good program.
Thank you, Larry. I also want to say that we need to thank the Eisenhower Foundation and the Union Pacific Foundation for giving us money to do things like this. I mean, we're just so lucky to have sponsors and donors to help support us do these great, fun things. And I'd like to thank Pam, because Pam's on the line. Pam's been our education specialist for a long time. She just recently left the Eisenhower Presidential Library, and I'm not going to talk about how angry I am at that because I'm really proud of her.
I can't talk.
And I also want to thank Troy and Samantha, because you guys really did a lot of work to be able for us to make this possible for us. And that's a big deal. Thank you very much.